Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
So happy to be here and so happy to see everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, hi Sarah. Happy to see you.
Happy to see you.
Hi, Chaya.
Hi, good morning. Good afternoon over here.
Okay, we'll wait a couple more minutes, a minute or two, and then we will begin. Hi, Sarah, glad to see you up and running.
Almost.
Almost. Okay, that's good.
Hi, Stina.
Hi, Sina. Good morning. Okay, I'm going to mute participants and we will begin. Give me 1 second. Okay, so good morning, everybody. I am, Baruch Hashem, extremely grateful to be back. This class gives me energy, gives me focus for the week, and I really, really missed it. Unfortunately, I was not able to give it the last few weeks, but really, really, really grateful that I am back and Baruch Hashem feeling a lot better. Okay, we are doing chapter 11 today in Tanya. Now, just as a segue into chapter 11, let us just remind ourselves what the previous chapter has been speaking about. Now, chapter 10 introduced us to the concept of the tzaddik in terms of different kinds of tzaddikim. And we did mention that, yes, it's true that our mission and our purpose is not to become a tzaddik. However, we do learn a lot for our divine service, for how to serve Hashem from the tzaddik. We are also going to see today in this chapter how last chapter discussed the tzaddik. This chapter will discuss the Rasha. Next chapter discusses the Benoni, for which the whole entire book of Tanya was written. But in order to understand the Rasha and the Benoni, the workings, the inner workings of the Rasha and the Benoni, we have to first understand how the tzaddik works, and that's why we learned about the tzaddik in last chapter. Now, last chapter, we discussed the difference between the complete tzaddik versus the incomplete tzaddik. The complete tzaddik, a tzaddik gomer, has completely transformed the evil in his animal soul. In other words, no evil exists. And when we say that he has completely transformed the evil in his animal soul, that is because his love for Hashem is complete. And therefore he despises evil. Not only has he transformed the evil, but he despises evil completely. The incomplete tzaddik, on the other hand, is still a tzaddik, right? He's completely transformed his animal soul, but there is a vestige of evil which remains. And he despises evil not for evil itself, but for what it obstructs. In other words, for as a means to an end. But he is still tzaddik. Those are the two types of tzaddikim that the Alter Rebbe explained to us in the previous chapter, chapter 10. Now, when we come into chapter 11, the Alter Rebbe is going to explain to us that there are also two categories of a rasha. Everything has a partner, a counterpart. So the same way as there is an incomplete tzaddik and a complete tzaddik, this chapter will explain to us the difference between a complete rasha and an incomplete rasha. Now, I do want to remind all of you, and we did say this in the beginning, that when we use the term rasha in Tanya, we are not actually referring to that demon with horns coming out of his head, smoke coming out of his nose, there is a type of rasha that is very bad, but we will understand from this chapter that rasha really is a term which refers to the possibility of sinning, which I don't know about you, but I definitely have the possibility of sinning. But we cannot make the mistake in terming ourselves as something terrible or evil. We do have to aspire to become a Beinoni, but we will see in this chapter how a rasha is really not that evil devil with the horns coming out of his head, or however you want to colloquially describe the rasha. So first of all, the Alter Rebbe describes the complete rasha as rasha v'ra loi, a rasha whose evil is to him, and we will explain that in a moment. In the same way as we said, a tzaddik gomer, a complete tzaddik, is tzaddik v'toiv v'loi. A tzaddik is good, is his. An incomplete rasha is described as a rasha v'toiv v'loi, a rasha who has some good. And there are differing degrees in this, as well as we are going to see further on in the chapter. Okay, now just as in the tzaddik, the divine soul overwhelms the animal soul, in a rasha, the animal soul dominates the godly soul. Sometimes completely, and sometimes occasionally, we will see that term exists. There is a rasha who only sins occasionally, but the possibility of sinning exists. Now, to understand this concept that a rasha can be someone who majority of the time actually is a pretty good person and only occasionally sins, we really have to understand the difference between the quality and quantity of sinning. A very interesting concept that the Alter Rebbe brings about in this chapter. First of all, quantity, how much a person sins, right? So when a person's animal soul overwhelms the godly soul, right, through him doing an avera, even sometimes, through him sinning even occasionally, he is weakening the strength and power of the godly soul at that moment of sin. Because the godly soul abhors sin. The godly soul cannot tolerate sin. So it wants to distance itself from sin and the person who is sinning. And therefore, because it cannot tolerate sin, we weaken it. We weaken its power through sinning. On the other hand, interestingly, very interestingly, and tough for us actually, when a person does a mitzvah, he does not necessarily weaken his animal soul, because an animal soul does not necessarily hate mitzvahs. Sometimes an animal soul, according to your nature or personality, can actually love to do a mitzvah. The animal soul may not be propelling a person to do a mitzvah because of Hashem, because Hashem told the person to do a mitzvah, and the animal soul can actually be trained to enjoy and derive pleasure from mitzvahs. That is why a Beinoni still has a very active animal soul. The animal soul has not been weakened or transformed in any way. That is in the realm of a tzaddik. On the other hand, when we sin, we do weaken not the actual divine soul, but the power the divine soul holds over us. And the reason that this is important to know is because it will help us to understand the difference between a complete Russia and an incomplete Russia. So that is the quantity of a soul. When we talk about the quantity of sinning, we are talking about how much a person sins. So it is the only thing really that can transform the animal soul into a vehicle for godliness is a very, very, very strong love for Hashem. And when you're sinning, you're not exactly loving Hashem at that particular moment. The love for Hashem that we produce is in the right side of the heart and overflows to the left side of the heart. And in a tzaddik, it actually it transforms the substance of the animal soul. But in potential Beinonis or Russia or Beinonis, the animal soul is alive and well. Maybe inactive, but it is very much so there. Which is why it is possible for a person who does mitzvahs majority of the time and only occasionally sins to be considered a Rasha because he has not sufficiently transformed the animal soul, and the possibility of sin exists, and this is because of the quantity. He sins a little bit. He doesn't sin a lot. And when we talk about quantity, we're just talking about a time limit, or that sometimes a person sins, but majority of the time a person is a really good person. You can even mistaken this person for like a Benoni and Tanya. Wow, this person is such a tzaddik, quote unquote. He's not according to Tanya, but wow, he's such a great person. But because the possibility of sinning exists, he is in quantity, he is considered a Rasha. But what about the quality of sinning? The quality of sinning is this topic is really, really very interesting because there are sins and there are sins, apparently. So it doesn't actually make a difference what kind of sin you do, but it makes a difference, firstly, which garments you use to sin. So we have 3 garments of the soul, right? So 3 ways that the soul expresses itself, which is thought, speech, and action. So let's take, for an example, a person who only sins in action. Doesn't think about it. He doesn't speak about it. He fell into the trap, sinned, but then he moves on. He does not dwell on it. He doesn't obsess about it. He just sins and continues with his life, does not mire himself further into thinking or speaking about his sin. Now, this is somebody very interesting because the quality of his sin is very, very small in sinning. Why? Because the expression of the soul, or the garment of the soul, which is action, is farthest removed from a person. The closest garment to your neshama is thought, then goes speech, and then goes action. So action is furthest from your inner self. The sin is more separate from the person in this case if he only sins and doesn't think about it and obsess about it. Which is why, interestingly enough, sometimes people who wrote to the Rebbe about grave sins, the Rebbe would tell them, Hesach hadas, just don't think about it, just move on. Do tshuva, take a resolution for the future, and move on. Now, when we talk about quality of sinning as it refers to speech, when we use the faculty of speech, the garment of speech, the quality, you don't actually do such a grave sin, such as speaking Lashon Hara. The quality is less. In other words, you are scoffing, which is referred to in this chapter of Tanya as leitzonus, or you don't speak pure Lashon Hara, but you speak what's called avak Lashon Hara, like the dust of Lashon Hara, which is just sort of, you give a hint to what your real thoughts are, but you don't really express them. And machshava, when a person sins with thought, because we can sin by thought, speech, and action, even though thought is not considered an actual sin. For example, if a person thinks immodest thoughts or thoughts of sinful relationships, for example, he's not actually committing the sin, but it is sometimes worse than the sin itself. So the quality of the sin is actually pretty bad when it comes to thoughts. Why is that? Because thought is the most delicate garment of the neshama. It can damage the neshama more than any other garment, speech or action. Action is actually limited. When you sin, you just do it once and that's it. Thought can be obsessive. It can be unlimited. You can be thinking about this all day long. And that's why it can harm your neshama even greater. We are actually meant to guard our thoughts because there is actually a mitzvah in the Torah, v'nishmarta mikol davar ra shelo yaharher bayom. You should guard yourself from any evil thing, that you should not think about it during the day. There is an aspect that we should guard our mind and guard our thoughts from having, for example, immodest thoughts or illicit relationships, etc. And the other reason why thinking and obsessing about sinning is so harmful, because instead of using your mind to be learning Torah and connecting with Hashem, you are thinking about sins and you are using your thought for something completely different. We can't think about two things at the same time. Now, that is one way when we referred to quality of sins, which refers to how many garments you're going to be using to sin. But when there's also a different way to measure sins qualitatively, and that is when a person does not blatantly sin, like he won't desecrate Shabbos in public or eat non-kosher food in public, but he will be lax in details of a mitzvah or the halacha, and that is called, it's a lesser quality of sinning. So here we have a description of a rasha that is not a complete rasha. And why is he not complete? Because the quality of his sin or the quantity of his sin is less. Either he does mitzvahs most of the time and sins very rarely, and even when he sins, the quality of his sin may not be in all three garments or they of his soul, or they may just be certain details of the halacha, and he definitely does not go out and sin blatantly. So that is a very interesting description of, dare I say it, most of us. Now, there are different kinds of incomplete rasha. This is one kind that we just described. So he, majority of the time, is really a good person, and he really does Hashem's will, and he wants to do Hashem's will, and he really regrets when he does not, and sometimes he just falls into the trap of the Yetzer Hara. He's like a high-level rasha, right? Because afterwards he reflects and he regrets his actions, and he does tshuva. But there's actually a lower level, incomplete rasha, which is really fascinating. The lower level incomplete rasha, which is still considered to have a vestige of good in him, in other words, he is still considered rasha, the toiv v'loi, he still has a vestige of good. His sins are quantitatively and qualitatively more. In other words, he sins most of the time. He does not do mitzvahs most of the time. He sins most of the time. And he sins with all his garments. Machshava, dibur, and ma'aseh. He thinks about it, talks about it, and actually does the sin. So, but why is he still considered an incomplete rasha? Meaning that he has a vestige of good in him, because he still has feelings of regret occasionally, right? However, he realizes that even though he has feelings of regret, he does not have strength alone to overcome his animal soul. In other words, he's not happy where he is, but he has no way out. Now, interestingly enough, again, I'm not the biggest expert in Tanya, but when I read this part of Tanya, what comes to mind is something that we know about nowadays, which is very common, unfortunately, and that is an addict. Whereas whether it could be in sex, drugs, alcohol, any form of addict, we know that they cannot extricate themselves from the hole. They need help. So they may be sinning most of the time, and they are regretting. So when we say that they reach rock bottom and they say, oh my gosh, I need help, that's the regret. They just cannot extricate themselves. Or again, any other type of Russia who sins majority of the time, sins more in quality and quantity. If they still have regret, meaning they still have a vestige of good and they realize this is not how I want to be, this is not how I want to show up in my life, I do regret it, just I don't know what the way out is, they are still considered to be an incomplete Russia. So what's a complete Russia? A Russia that is complete is considered to be a Russia vera loy. So he owns his evil. He completely his evil animal soul completely dominates him. A complete Russia never has regrets. He never has thoughts of tshuva, and the evil has overwhelmed the good to a very large extent. None of us here fall into that category. However, what's very interesting is the following, and this is the dynamics between the animal soul and the godly soul. In the case of a tzaddik, the animal soul is transformed. We cannot say the same for a complete Russia that he transforms his godly soul. The godly soul will never become an ally of the Russia. We can't transform a good thing, the godly soul, a divine thing, into something evil. So what happens to the godly soul in the case of a complete Russia who never has regrets, sins all the time, doesn't have thoughts of tshuva, is evil has completely dominated the good? It does not actually, his godly soul does not become transformed. It is not considered to be within him. It still has a connection to him. In other words, it surrounds him. It hovers above his subconscious so that he's occasionally aware of it. And therefore, even such a Jew who is a complete Russia can still be counted towards a minyan and can still be counted in the calculation when we say that there are 10 Jews together, then the Shekhinah rests upon them. He is still counted as part of the Jewish nation. But for him, his soul is not within him. He is completely dominated by the animal soul, and the godly soul surrounds him, hovers above him, but is not within him. And obviously, he would have a very, very long journey to go to do tshuva, and that will be discussed in the third book of Tanya, which is Igeres HaTshuva. So this is in a nutshell the description of the inner workings of not only a Russia, when we talk about the incomplete Russia, but a potential Benoni. And it is important to be aware of this because, like I always say, awareness is the precursor to choice. If we want to say that we have true free choice, whether or not to do a mitzvah or to sin, we have to develop an awareness. If we don't have that awareness, then the choice is not truly a choice. We are dominated by our animal soul. That is our default setting. However, when we do develop the awareness, then we can have a choice to extricate ourselves from this Russia level and to begin aspiring to, if not becoming a total Benoni, which will be described in the next chapter, but to have Benoni moments. Okay, now Shalamis has asked a very interesting question. What effect do parents have on the garments of the soul? And this is going back to previous chapters in Tanya, where at the moment of conception, the thoughts of the parents affect the garments of the soul. And she gives the example, what if a parent is not even Jewish, right? Now, here's the good news. There's good news and good news. The good news is that, yes, before our children are born, we can give them a head start by ensuring that the garments of their soul are holy. And this is done by what we think at the moment of conception. And that is a whole another topic, not for now, but it is mentioned in Tanya in, I believe, chapter 3. However, here's the good news. You can change your garments. If your clothes are torn or stained or don't fit very well, you go to the store and you buy new ones. Our garments, the source of where our neshama comes from is not up to us, but we can change our garments. And that is our lifelong avodah, actually. So it doesn't matter. Even if the parents gave garments that were not adequate, that is actually the person's destiny to be able to change those garments. And throughout their lives, they will be presented with lots and lots and lots of opportunities to refine their thought, speech, and action in alignment with the divine soul, and slowly, slowly change those garments to better fitting ones, to holier garments. I hope that answers your question, Shalom. Yes, hi, Sarah.
So I have a question that's been like, it's really bizarre, like pulling it out, but when you're doing the thought, speech, and action, so someone gets super angry at someone and they think, I just like to kill him. Like, I just can't stand him. Like, I want to kill him, right? He's like the worst, you're saying. Then there's someone who says with a friend, you know what? I can't stand that person. I'd really like to kill them. And then there's a person in an act of passion that just doesn't think about it. It's not premeditated. He kills someone. So I've taken, right? So you're saying the worst is the first person who's thinking about it because their brain is all.
Okay, so murder is actually pretty grave sin. So that would not be
So
that would not enter to like a lesser quality sin. In other words, murder is a pretty big sin, one of the 3 sins that one would have to give up their life for before actually committing, right?
So someone sees a beautiful diamond ring. I'd love to like, oh gosh, I'd really love, like he's thinking, I'd really love to like have that and steal that kind of thing. The next person talks about it and the next person actually does it. Like just he's in the store and he goes, just grabs it. Like it's not even premeditated.
Right.
So then
but that, yeah.
Worse?
So so you know what's interesting about your question is that both examples that you just gave are probably not practical examples in our lives, right? We're not going into a jewelry store and robbing the store. We're not killing anyone, right? Chas v'shalom.
But
we do
just grab something. They don't even.
Right. So those, yeah, and if they don't regret it at all, they are actually in the category of a complete Russia.
Mm-hmm.
It's only if they really and truly regret killing somebody or regret robbing the store, and usually people who act impulsively along those lines are really not regretting their actions. That's why they have reached the stage where they're able to do such a grave sin impulsively. But what about the sins that are practical and that we do in our life, right? So we are, let's say, you're really, really angry at a person. That was like the beginning of your example, right? So you are a very in control person. So instead of lashing out at your peer, spouse, friend, whoever it is, person in the store, you are going to control yourself. You're not going to act, but boy, oh boy, are you going to be obsessing about it the whole day long. That's actually more harmful to your neshama than actually just saying, you stupid idiot, to the store clerk or whatever, right? That's not good either, by the way. Not good. You apologize, you regret it, your actions. Oh, I'm so sorry, right? But if you are obsessing about it all day long, that is more harmful, which is why I always speak about the stories we tell ourselves, right? Because we are not able to control our emotions, but we can produce a different emotion. So if in the moment when you get angry, you're able to transform the anger on a very basic level thinking it's hashgacha pratis, this person may be having a bad day, you start judging them favorably. You're not obsessing about the anger all day long, and goodbye, you're not thinking about it anymore. Because what we tend to do is either we think about it all day long and we talk to our husband for hours about, what happened to me today? This guy really, really drove me crazy and I'm so angry and I'm so upset. Didn't say anything to the person who made you angry or upset. So that's thought speech. Then if you go and lash out at that person, then that's the action. But we could actually just dissolve it all by starting with the thoughts and thinking different thoughts.
So when you get angry, excuse me, at someone, does that make you a Russia? But you're transform it. Like I can see myself talking like, oh, he's probably having a bad day or whatever. But
Right. So the more and more we practice doing this, the easier it becomes, the more natural, more a part of us it becomes. Yes. And going back to the jewelry store, it's the example that I always give. Like a Russia is conflicted. Yes. We are all potential Benoni, so we do have this conflict within us. Like, should we say something? Should we think about something? Should we do something? Right. So if you're walking past the jewelry store, the tzaddik doesn't even see the jewelry store. The Russia will walk past the jewelry store and say, wow, I really want that ring. Is there a way that I can get the ring? Maybe I should rob the store. Maybe I should rob a bank. Maybe I should. He may or may not act on his desires, but he really has the strong desire. And a Beinoni will understand, like he'll walk past the store and say, oh yeah, that's a nice diamond ring, but it's like so not in his reality to buy it for like $1 million. So he just walks on by, right? He's not conflicted. A Beinoni is not conflicted at all because he's worked on himself to such a point that even though he does have the animal soul and he understands the desire for sin and he can relate to it, he himself, not conflicted, just goes on by. The Russia, and again, I don't like to call us a Russia, but truthfully, Alter Rebbe puts us in this category. We have a conflict. We are conflicted. I'm angry. I was speaking to somebody yesterday who said to me, I was so upset at myself that I got angry. I didn't like myself at that point. I didn't want to get angry. And then, of course, we worked on the whole changing your thoughts situation, right? Which is how we dissipate that emotion. Because we cannot control our emotions, but we can produce other emotions.
What about the Russia who asks Hashem for success in stealing the ring? Because there's like people do that. People still.
Yeah. So that's the famous Hayom Yom that we can learn from Russia. That's not anything good. That's not something to be proud of. You can't ask Hashem for help in sinning.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Oh, Shalamis asked about abortion. It's a sin, like any other sin. And if a person did it when they didn't know, when they were tinok shenishba, in other words, they didn't know it was a sin, they didn't understand the importance of the sin. I do understand that it's a sin in a very different category. And I think that the person would have to really, really go for help to overcome that sin. Sometimes when it's a sin where we cannot change the past, the Rebbe suggests to us various times, suggested to different people, that if you yourself cannot change the past, you could at least teach other people about the significance. So I would suggest to that person when they have come to terms with it to actually spread awareness. And that is a way of them overcoming the past. Okay, ladies, is there any other questions or observations?
Yeah, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So we teach people to light Shabbos candles, and let's say they don't light Shabbos candles, and we say they don't know enough. So at what point you say this is a sin, or this person doesn't know enough? Like, of course, they need to know it for
Why?
themselves.
One second. Why are you worrying about other people's sins?
Maybe I'm worried about my sins.
Okay, so that's the differentiation. You see, like we're so busy worrying about everybody else. Everybody has their own Yetzer Hara and their own inner battle. So our part in it is we can teach. We can't do anything with information. The implementation is up to other people, right? You cannot force a person to implement. You cannot force a person to transform. You can only give them the information.
Yeah, but maybe me teaching them is not clear enough or not.
Oh, okay. So then you can have a heart-to-heart conversation with them, but you're not responsible for their sin.
You know how you have people come to you for like years and years, and they're like on the same level, and you wonder if it's maybe I'm
Yeah,
not.
I can totally relate to that. I have people coming to my classes for years and years and years, but I do believe that they will change at a certain point. You know, the famous story, I think I have said this over here at one of the Rabbeim, that there are three things that change a person: money, alcohol, and learning Chassidus. Now, what if a person has so much money, but he doesn't change? What if a person drinks a whole ton of alcohol and doesn't get drunk? And what if a person learns Chassidus and just doesn't change? What's that a sign of? So it's a sign that he has to, if money has not transformed the person, that means he doesn't have enough. He needs to learn to have more money. If alcohol did not change the person, he's got to drink more. Same
Better.
thing. Yeah, same thing. If he has not been changed because of Chassidus, that is a sign that he has to learn more.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
it. Some people need more, some people need less. It's like the same thing as medicines and vitamins and whatever, you know. Some people need more, some people need less to spark them. It's not up to us to decide that.
So you just say I do me and the
You
rest
do
is.
your part, exactly. You cannot control the other person.
No, I understand that part. My question is, how much do you worry? Oh, this person's coming me for 25 years and they're still walking in shorts, even when
So I would work on changing my thoughts about that person. I wouldn't say, oh, the person is coming here with shorts, and why doesn't that person change? You can change your thoughts, have different thoughts about the person. That's all you can do.
No, I don't have any bad thoughts. I'm just wondering.
No, you can start thinking instead of wondering, oh, why is that person not changing? You could start consciously changing your thoughts to, I'm so happy that person came to my class. I'm sure that my words will penetrate him and that Hashem is helping him transform. You don't even have to think about it. That's the real truth of the matter.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Okay?
Say no, thank you.
Okay, ladies.
Good to see you, Hannah. Okay.
Yes, thank you. Good to be here. Mitzvah Hashem. See you all next week. Have a great week.
Kol tov.